The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before, and it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases, both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continued to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves, meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving, but forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution, but we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on again, off again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. 58 people so far, 59 people, some reports, dead in Las Vegas. Hundreds injured. Numbers floating between 400 and 500. I mean, it's a massacre. It's just an absolute massacre. This guy was found to have 10 weapons of war in his hotel room, just, kicked out the windows and just shot the place up. And so Republican Senator Pat Roberts tweets out, "God bless the victims of the terrible and senseless shooting in Las Vegas." But Pat Roberts votes against gun control. Senator Richard Shelby tweets out, "Praying for the victims and the families of the victims involved in the tragic Las Vegas shooting. Thankful to the brave first responders." Yet Richard Shelby voted against any kind of rational gun control, limits on clips. Things that would still be just fine within the consideration of the Heller decision. The limits on the size of magazines and on the just the whole spectrum of weapons of war, assault weapons. Senator Orrin Hatch woke up this morning to a horrifying news out of Vegas, shocking and senseless. God bless the victims and their families. Well, thank you, Senator Hatch. Stop voting to put these kind of crazed weapons in the hands of these kinds of people. Marco Rubio this morning, I'm praying for all the victims, their families, and our first responders in the Las Vegas Mandalay Bay shooting. This is Marco Rubio. Then why do you vote to allow these kind of weapons to continue to be on our streets? I mean, this is not rocket science. This is very, very straightforward stuff. And remember back in February when Trump became president, and well, actually, remember back when Newtown happened in Connecticut? I'm not talking about the Alex Jones saying that it was a false flag operation, although they're probably already saying that about Vegas right now. I'm talking about when President Obama tried to pass any kind of reasonable gun control legislation through Congress, and the Republicans absolutely obstructed all of it. And the NRA, you know, they were saying, hey, it's, you know, he got a bunch of dead kids. It's too soon to talk about gun control. Right? But President Obama did do something. He was able administratively, he didn't, you know, it didn't require Congress to do this. He was able administratively, as the head of the executive branch, to pass a rule that would cause the Social Security Administration to share with the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System the names of people who are on Social Security disability because of mental illness. Now, this does not expose those names to the public. This is sharing them with the FBI so that people who are so severely mentally disabled that they're living on Social Security disability for their mental illness could not buy weapons. Obama did that in response to Newtown. It was all he could do, right? Congress would not go along with assault weapons bans or, you know, anything. So he passed that rule. And guess what the Republicans did on February 2nd? They said, no, we've got to get rid of this rule. There were 75,000 people who were so mentally disabled that they were drawing Social Security benefits. And hey, that's 75,000 potential customers for the gun industry. So as Joan McCarter writes over at Daily Kos, the Senate voted on February 15th, 57-43 to get rid of the rule. Trump signed it on February 28th. So now crazy people, or people who are so severely mentally disabled that they can't work, and they have jumped through all the hoops necessary to prove that disability so they qualify for Social Security disability, are able to buy all the guns they want since February. Where is there any actual accountability here? Oh, it's all about the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was passed for two reasons. Two principal reasons. I've got a piece up on Alternet about this right now. You can read it at alternet.org. The Second Amendment was passed for two reasons. The first reason, which was the original purpose of, you know, why it was there and the whole conversation, and this was a conversation that started in correspondence between James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, and you can read it in the historical record in 1787-88, that Jefferson was strongly of the opinion that when the country was at peace, there should not be a standing army, because standing armies lead to military coups and they overthrow democracies. And Madison was, okay, we'll do that. We'll put that in. But if you're not going to have a standing army, you're going to have a militia. You're going to have every person be a member of the army, even when it's not, you know, when they're not marching around in uniform. You're going to have to do it the way that Switzerland has done it for hundreds of years. And they were all like, yeah, of course. That's what we're going to do. So that was reason number one, was not to have standing armies during times of war. Reason no, and Jefferson, when Jefferson became president in 1800 or 1801, there were over 300,000 men in the military, and he reduced that down to like 6,000, which was ultimately not a good thing when it came to the War of 1812, but it's a whole other story. But here we have these mass shootings, almost always committed by angry white men, by the way. Somehow I suspect there's not going to be a big discussion in the media about what is it about angry white men that they're always shooting people, places up and things like that. We've got this from Jen Hayden over at Daily Kos. 91 people a day are killed by guns in the United States. 91 people a day. Now, people are calling this the worst gun massacre in American history. I would say that's probably not true. In fact, I would say that's almost certainly not true. It's the worst massacre of white people by white people in this country, arguably, outside of any specific, setting aside the Civil War and things like that. But white people have been massacring people of color, particularly Native Americans, from the get-go. And they've killed a hell of a lot more of them than this, 58 dead and 500 wounded at Mandalay Bay. So let's keep this in perspective. At a certain level, the chickens essentially are coming home to roost from our promoting this gun culture, this Wild West mentality, this you're not safe if you don't have a gun. And yet, we're not safe because of all the guns. And, there should be the ability to just kind of put two and two together here and figure out what's going on. I'd say it's time for us to either reinterpret, as the Supreme Court did in the Heller case, when they did it the wrong way, either reinterpret the Second Amendment or repeal it. It's an anachronism. It was a nice effort to not have a standing army that did not last beyond the War of 1812. And it's time to get rid of it, in my humble opinion.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, and then the other thing the Republicans did just a couple weeks ago, said, hey, we're gonna loosen the rules on silencers. Great. And welcome back. Paul, watching Free Speech TV in North San Juan, California. Hey, Paul, what's up?
I'm just responding to the killings that we've been hearing about all morning, and the repeated, what I think of as bias or even bigotry about people, mentally ill people, so-called mentally ill people. I think the percentages of, again, so-called mentally ill people who kill with guns is infinitesimal. Only a very, very few people who've killed other people with guns were mentally ill, at least as we define that. So there's a kind of bias going on there that I find objectionable. I think the problem is with Americans, not mentally ill individuals. I think the real problem is with Americans who believe that guns are somehow sacrosanct and that controlling guns intelligently is unacceptable. Anyway, that was the essence of what I was concerned about, Tom.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Paul. Carol in Manassas, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. What a morning.
Yeah.
I was watching CNN this morning, and a woman on there, a commentator, I don't know her name, asked the most absurd question I have ever heard. She actually asked, how could this happen? how could this happen?
Right.
I mean,
in a country where 91 people a day are killed by guns.
Yeah. I mean, the response to these mass killings is always the same. How could this happen, or this needs to stop? Well, all you have to do is look at the actions of our Congress to know how this could happen. Mm-hmm. And not only just the gun laws and the NRA. I mean, as far as Nevada goes, it's an NRA's wet dream over there. They can buy anything they want anytime they want.
Yeah.
And it's just sad. I mean, I feel terrible for the victims, but it's really not. It's not surprising somehow, and that's even sad.
Yeah, yeah. I'm wondering, when are we going to find that this guy was recently put on psychiatric meds too, SSRI drugs that are so frequently associated with mass shootings.
Yeah.
I hope that's not the case, but
it is odd of the age of the man. That's odd. That's an anomaly there.
Yeah. The average shooter's in his 30s.
Right. Right.
And this guy is 64.
Yeah, that's very surprising.
Yeah. We're going to find out more as time goes on. Unfortunately, the psychiatric histories are rarely disclosed because of doctor-patient confidentiality. So it's typically years later that we discover that people were on SSRI drugs for a psychiatric illness. And, and there seems to be, if Peter Bregan is right, he's been on the show a number of times, he's written books about it, it seems to be that because these SSRI drugs reduce affect, they reduce empathy, they reduce your ability to experience other people as fully human, that therefore they make it easier for some vulnerable individuals. It's not right across the board, and SSRI drugs helps some people tremendously. You make them functional, but for other people, there's a reason why there's a black box warning on these kinds of drugs for suicide. Because if you start thinking about suicide, don't take this drug. And this is what this guy did. He committed suicide and took a bunch of people with him. Carol, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a lot of other stuff in the news, by the way, that, stuff going on in the world, and a few of these things I think are worth mentioning. Trump's response to Puerto Rico, which apparently had a 4 or 5 day just complete pause in the middle of it while he was tweeting about black men in the NFL or something like that, is, kind of starting to crank up. But in the meantime, a memo about how they were going to spin their response to the media has been leaked. This is not good. The mayor of San Juan and Donald Trump are still going back and forth. She keeps saying, we need money, we need food, we need water, we need help. And he keeps saying, she's a lousy leader. It's It's really extraordinary. Trump complaining about the news coverage, saying it's fake news, saying to the people in Puerto Rico, don't watch the fake news. And John Favreau, who is a former speechwriter for Obama, tweets back, they're not watching the news because they no longer have televisions, power, or homes, you effing dolt. Favreau tweeted. Right. So, meanwhile, in Spain, Castilian, the Catalan people, Barcelona and region, they want to secede, essentially, declare their independence and secede from Spain. And the official Spanish government is having nothing to do with it. But the vote kind of went on anyway, and it looks like about 90% of the people in Catalan, however you say it, voted for independence. So you've got that, you've got Brexit, you've got Scotland perhaps coming along, voting for independence. I mean, is there kind of a trend going? Look at the Kurds, just voted for independence in Iraq, and then of course you got Kurds in Syria, and you got Kurds in Turkey, and the Turkish, Syrian, and Iraqi Kurds together would like to reunite their country that they had before the end of World War I, Kurdistan, and put that thing back together again. So we'll see. Rex Tillerson is telling us, hey, don't worry, we're talking to North Korea. Everything's going to be fine. And then Donald Trump tweets out, Tillerson's wasting his time talking to North Korea. That's real helpful. I mean, there's something very strange going on here. And SCHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, or CHIP, CHIP, has expired. It expired on Saturday. 9 million children are protected under this program. Well, the funding for the program expired, and Congress did not renew it. And if they don't do so soon, there's going to be, 9 million kids who don't have routine checkups, immunizations, doctor's visits, prescriptions, dental and vision care, inpatient and outpatient hospital care, lab and x-ray services, or emergency services. They're going to lose all those things. 3 states and D.C. will run out of CHIP money by December. The majority of the states will run out by March, according to a July report from Medicaid and the CHIP Payment and Access Commission. Another study from the Kaiser Foundation found that 10 states would run out of money by the year's end. And the NFL protests are continuing. Los Angeles Rams linked arms. Robert Quinn raised a fist. Members of the New England Patriots and Dallas Cowboys stood. Several members of the Cleveland Browns stood with fist raised. It's getting strange. About 30 members of the San Francisco 49ers took a knee for the anthem. Their teammates stood behind them with hands on the kneeling players' shoulders and others over their heads. The team's statement was, as the majority of us have done throughout our careers, we use our platform as members of an NFL team and our right to freedom of expression to speak for those whose voice is not heard. It is important that we continue to emphasize that despite our different backgrounds and beliefs, we still love each other and are truly a brotherhood. Our gesture today was an intentional effort to demonstrate that. It's remarkable. What's so amazing is that because the media has not referred to these gestures as protests of police killing of people of color, but instead simply call them protests. Trump and the whole Nixon group around him have been successful in characterizing these as protests against something else, right? Like protests against the flag or, black people who aren't patriotic enough. I mean, that's essentially what Trump is saying here.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And it's in large part because the media has completely failed every day to talk about what these protests are actually about.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Naomi Klein's brilliant new book, This Changes Everything. This from the introduction. A voice came over the intercom. Would the passengers of Flight 3935, scheduled to depart Washington, D.C. for Charleston, South Carolina, kindly collect their carry-on luggage and get off the plane? They went down the stairs and gathered on the hot tarmac. Then they saw something unusual. The wheels of the U.S. Airways jet had sunk into the black pavement as if it was wet cement. The wheels were lodged so deep, in fact, that the truck that came to tow the plane away couldn't pry out loose. The airline had hoped that without the added weight of the plane's 35 passengers, the aircraft would be light enough to pull. It wasn't. Someone posted a picture. Why is my flight canceled? Because D.C. is so damn hot that our planes sank 4 inches into the pavement. Eventually, a larger, more powerful vehicle was brought in to tow the plane, and this time it worked. The plane finally took off 3 hours behind schedule. The spokesperson for the airline blamed the incident on very unusual temperatures. The temperatures in the summer of 2012 were indeed unusually hot, as they were the year before and the year before. And it's no mystery why this has been happening. The profligate burning of fossil fuels, the very thing that U.S. Airways was bound and determined to do, despite the inconvenience presented by a melting tarmac. This irony, the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is so radically changing our climate that it's getting in the way of our capacity to burn fossil fuels, did not stop the passengers of Flight 3935 from re-embarking and continuing their journeys. Nor was climate change mentioned in any of the major news coverage of the incident. I'm in no position to judge these passengers. All of us who live high consumer lifestyles, wherever we may happen to reside, are metaphorically passengers on Flight 3935. Faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, our entire culture is continuing to do the very thing that caused the crisis, only with an extra dose of elbow grease behind it. Like the airline bringing in a truck with a more powerful engine to tow that plane, the global economy is upping the ante from conventional sources of fossil fuels to even dirtier and more dangerous versions. Bitumen from the Alberta tar sands, oil from deepwater drilling, gas from hydraulic fracking, coal from detonated mountains, and so on. Meanwhile, each supercharged natural disaster produces new irony-laden snapshots of a climate increasingly inhospitable to the very industries most responsible for its warming, like the 2013 historic floods in Calgary that forced the head offices of the oil companies mining the Alberta tar sands to go dark and send their employees home, while a train carrying flammable petroleum products teetered on the edge of a disintegrating rail bridge. Or the drought that hit the Mississippi River 1 year earlier, pushing water levels so low that barges loaded with coal and oil were unable to move for days while they waited for the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge a channel. They had to appropriate funds allocated to rebuild from the previous year's historic flooding along the same waterway. Or the coal-fired power plants in other parts of the country that were temporarily shut down because the waterways that they draw into cooler machinery were either too hot or too dry, or in some cases both. Living with this kind of cognitive dissonance is simply part of being alive in this jarring moment of history, when a crisis that we have been studiously ignoring is hitting us in the face. And yet we're doubling down on the stuff that caused the crisis in the first place. I denied climate change for longer than I care to admit. I knew it was happening, sure, and not like Donald Trump and the Tea Party years going on about how the continued existence of winter proves it's all a hoax. But I stayed pretty hazy on the details and only skimmed most of the news stories, especially the really scary ones. I told myself the science was too complicated and that the environmentalists, they're dealing with it. And I continue to behave as if there was nothing wrong with the shiny card in my wallet attesting to my elite frequent flyer status. A great many of us engage in this kind of climate change denial. We look for a split second and then we look away. Or we look but then turn it into a joke. More signs of the apocalypse, which is another way of looking away. Or we look but tell ourselves comforting stories about how humans are clever and will come up with a technological miracle that will safely suck the carbon out of the skies or magically turn down the heat of the sun, which I was to discover while researching this book is yet another way of looking away. Or we try to look, we look but try to be hyper-rational about it. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient to focus on economic development than climate change, since wealth is the best protection from climate extremes, weather extremes. As if having a few more dollars will make much difference when your city is underwater, which is a way of looking away if you happen to be a policy wonk. Or we look but tell ourselves we're too busy to care about something so distant and abstract, even though we saw the water in the subways in New York City and the people on the rooftops in New Orleans and know that no one is safe, the most vulnerable least of all. And though perfectly understandable, this too is a way of looking away. Or we look, but tell ourselves that all we can do is focus on ourselves. Meditate and shop at farmers markets and stop driving. But forget trying to actually change the systems that are making the crisis inevitable, because that's too much bad energy and it'll never work. And at first it may appear as if we are looking, because many of these lifestyle changes are indeed part of the solution. But we still have one eye tightly shut. Or maybe we really look, but then inevitably we seem to forget. Remember and then forget again. Climate change is like that. It's hard to keep in your head for very long. We engage in this odd form of on again, off again ecological amnesia for perfectly rational reasons. We deny it because we fear that letting in the full reality of this crisis will change everything. And we are right. And the book is This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and you've heard my rant for the day on this. House Republicans to vote on loosening restrictions on gun silencers after Las Vegas shooting. This is in Politicus USA Sports. House Republicans are scheduled to vote on a bill this week that would loosen restrictions on gun silencers. Brilliant. Just what we need. House Republicans are scheduled. Yeah, I just read that. Politico reported on September 21, the Sportsman's Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act, introduced by Jeff Duncan, Republican of South Carolina. They come up for a House vote as early as this week. The Duncan legislation includes language revising federal regulations on silencers, which currently have tougher purchasing requirements than guns. So if the guy had had a silencer, they wouldn't have even known where the shooting was coming from. Would have been, arguably useful for a mass murderer. How's it useful for anybody else? Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind?
Well, at least we know where the GOP's priorities are at.
Yeah, we've always known that.
They should. Exactly. They're the party of death. They always have been, and they always will be. Ever since they adopted this, I don't even know what to describe it as anymore. It's just corporatism. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just, this whole chip thing. I mean, they didn't reauthorize that. They're not doing anything about Puerto Rico or Texas or the Virgin Islands or Florida, honestly. In fact, they're trying to cut FEMA funding. The wars are still raging. They're trying to cut our health care. They're always doing that. They got rid of flood insurance regulations a few days ago. They got rid of the mentally handicapped rule that you just mentioned. So basically, they're getting rid of everything, and they're basically going to turn us into Somalia pretty much at this point. I mean, we're headed towards a third world country at this point.
Yeah. I mean, look at the infrastructure of this country right now. It's falling apart.
Exactly. I'm ashamed to even call myself American half the time. I go around the other... Like, what is there to be proud about this country anymore? It's like it's a dump.
Well, I think that there's a lot to be proud about in the United States. There are a lot of good people in this country. This country was founded on the ideals of the Enlightenment, very imperfectly acted out, obviously, with the genocide of Native Americans and enslavement of African Americans. But it was founded on some pretty amazing ideas, given the 6,000 years that preceded it, and we've come, generation by generation, closer and closer to achieving those ideals. That's the good news. The bad news is that the Supreme Court, since 1976, has been increasingly giving more and more rights and powers to corporations and rich individuals, and taking those powers away from, we the people, from our government, and thus. Much of what's going on is is going on, but I don't think that America has gone nuts. It's that so much of our discourse has been captured by people who make an enormous amount of money on, as you point out, Jared, on death. Whether it's the NRA or the military defense industry or whatever. Jared, thanks for your call and your comments. Linda in
is it Stephenson, Virginia, or Stevenson, Virginia?
Hey there, Tom. I'm going to get you off speaker here.
Sure. Thank you, Linda.
Unless it's clear enough.
No, it sounds fine, actually.
Okay, actually, good, because I'm out here painting signs for Virginia to flip blue coming up this election. So
Good on you.
Homemade signs. I'm not paying $600 to the Democratic Party. But anyway, I just wanted to you were mentioning about silencers, and that's why I called.
Mm-hmm.
The House resolution bill that my GOP congresswoman co-sponsored is H.R. 367. So I called Warner and King, who are my senators, this morning, and Senator Warner's office did, in fact, say, because I've been at a wedding and kind of busy doing all this other stuff, it's over in the Senate side right now, and it's over in finance. And I'm like, why is it in finance? Well, of course, there's a tax implication to it somehow. But Americans need to wake up. You're exactly right. Had there been a silencer, it would have taken far longer to pinpoint where it was. You wouldn't see the flash because it was light. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the silencer not only suppresses the noise, it suppresses the flash as well. And, he wasn't firing tracer bullets. I mean, typically military ammunition, every 25th or 50th bullet is a magnesium bullet, so you can see the and you see this in the old World War II movies and that sort of thing, or Vietnam War movies. But this guy wasn't firing military ammunition. He wasn't firing tracer bullets. So, a silencer would have helped him tremendously.
Yeah, and why do we have Americans loading up on ammunition and having automatic weapons? I don't understand it. They outman our police. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. They're outgunning our police, I think is what you meant to say. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Linda, thank you for the call. Jenny in Hookstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jenny, what's on your mind today?
Well, you know how you said that they do a lot of talking and they say they're going to pray, and which is hollow actions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I wish people would take the time in whatever occupation, position they are, and look at what they're doing and see right now, since we need so much social conscience raising, when you're working on art projects with the kids in school, when you're talking about the books that you read and what they really mean. When a bully is being dealt with at school, instead of just saying, okay, I will deal with that as I've heard of, and then they talk to them, it's like, wait a minute, bring the parents in, bring the kid in, and talk about what's happening. Because we have people intimidating, bullying, like they said, try to work it out and show that person that you have to have a little bit more understanding, and like you said, empathy has to go a little bit further.
Yep.
And I don't understand how after Mrs. Gifford in Newtown that they can continue. Like they said,
there is money to be made, Jenny. There are hundreds of millions of dollars being made in the weapons industry, and that industry has a very, very effective lobbying arm in the National Rifle Association. And then you've got politicians who have decided that people who have an affection for guns are a subset of voters who can be wooed purely on that issue to then vote, against their own economic interests, but they'll vote in favor of being able to have more guns. So,
I thought they would reflect more to think, as a society as a whole, you need different services all the time. So while you do these things, and then you have to turn to go to a hospital, go to a doctor, and all these people have to do that, and those people are dealing with those people thinking, this person has done what?
Yeah. Well, the problem with thinking about society, or assuming that Republicans might think about society, is the old Maggie Thatcher quote from 1979, where she said, "There's no such thing as society. There's only a collection of individuals." And in that, she was echoing the thinking of Ayn Rand and Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman and say who?
Self-centeredness.
Yeah, von Mises, all of these guys. I mean, this is their ideology. Jenny, I got to move along, but thank you. Very well said. Very well said. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's up?
Yeah, the people that are benefiting from the shooting, it's going to be gun owners. Every time there's a shooting, there seems to be a scare. And the shooter, he worked for Lockheed Martin, where they're making a killing in profits from arms. And then I'm seeing that...
I understood he was retired, Dion.
Okay.
At least that's what his brother said. Have you? I haven't looked myself at the stock market, but Troy told me this morning that the gun manufacturers' stocks are all popping up right now. So it's not hurting them, apparently.
Trump is back with any guns or arms stocks. I think that would be interesting for Congress to look into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you think the right is going to politicize this? Because I'm seeing it on right-wing media sites and comments that they think this was Antifa supporter trying to get revenge on Trump supporters, and that's how they're playing it. That we have to get behind Trump and the NRA. Apparently,
one of the guys over at 4chan, or one of the kind of group, I don't want to call it a fringe group because they've got considerable number of people and a lot of power, but apparently when the name of the girlfriend of this guy was released, somebody tracked her back and found that she has a relative, a brother or something like that, who has posted something on some social media indicating that he likes Democrats. And so that gets turned into basically implying or suggesting that the shooter does or was or something like this, And
this gets politicized instead of getting down to the real issue. And I hope Ivanka Trump can convince Trump to prevent the next school shooting.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. You can't control the right-wing memes that are out there, whether they're accurate or not. And this first one apparently is not. But yeah, we're just going to have to keep an eye on this one. But hopefully this will be the beginning of people waking up. We thought that at Newtown, though. It's just amazing. Dion, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, your thoughts on these issues, and mine, right after this. And welcome back. Al in Port Orford, Oregon. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Reason I'm calling, first off, as regards to the shootings, my only thing there is it's sad it happened, very sad. But, this is not the first mass shooting we've had. We've had, several, many, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of impact.
Yeah, we're averaging 2 or 3 a week, I think.
Well,
just typically,
ridiculous.
The definition of a mass shooting being more than 4 or more dead people. That's happening at the rate of 2 or 3 a week. Yeah.
Well, so from what I can see of the way the United States tends to think now, and even enough in the public, all right, if it doesn't have an immediate economic influence, if it doesn't affect them, if it's just another thing being flashed over the news, it's a story for a few days and then it's gone. Yeah. There isn't a lot of conscience about it. Yeah. All right, let's put it that way. So that's part of my thing. Another thing, when I get into the economics of things, if I look at even Trump, to me he is not the disease. He's a symptom of a disease. All right, and I'm just going to have to be honest with you. We are in a rather decadent economy. Okay, and yes, there is the 1% and so on, but it still takes a certain number of millions, whether it be the top 10 or 20%, that supports this system, that allows the corporations to do what they do, that allows the government to do what they do, because that's where the money is. It isn't just the top 1%. And that's where the loyalty is. These people don't want change. They may talk, even some liberals may talk about nibbling at things like social injustice, whether it be gay rights or something like that, which, by the way, I'm all in favor of. That's not my point. But my point being is it's always follow the money. Wherever the money goes, that's where the corruption is, and it's building farther and farther. And you have much more of a class system now than you had 40 years ago. So that's my basic point.
Yeah, and I think it's a good and reasonable point. And your comment that Trump isn't the problem, he's the symptom, I think is a really, really solid one. But I would say I would take it to a larger frame. He is the symptom of oligarchy. He is the symptom of a democracy that has been hollowed out by the Supreme Court repeatedly ruling that corporations and wealthy individuals can have outsized political influence on a nation. Overwhelmingly large political influence. And the consequence of the oligarchs having that kind of both political and economic control, which, by the way, is the definition of fascism, the consequence of that is that, A, the middle class begins to vanish, and B, that the rights of average Americans begin to vanish. Our rights to privacy are vanishing. Our right to health care is being disputed. Our right to an education is rapidly vanishing. Betsy DeVos doing the best job she can to destroy our public schools. Our rights to clean air and clean water vanishing. Our right to live in an economy that has competition. That's something. These have all been under assault since the beginning of Reaganism, and we're still living in this Reaganism era, Al. And that's the big problem in my mind. Al, thanks for the call. Well said. Well said. Trump is not the problem. He is a symptom of the problem. I absolutely agree. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Ann in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hello, how you doing today, Tom?
I'm fine. What's up?
Another gloomy Monday.
Well, I mean, there's some good stuff going on here and there, but
yeah. But I agree that you did make a valid point about white on white crime. It's not being discussed as much about black on black crime. And, I wanted to make a point. Hate breeds hate. So Donald Trump has not been spreading love and togetherness, but hate and division.
Yeah.
And
it was the basis of his campaign.
Yeah. He's not bringing this country together. And his demeanor. Did you see the speech this morning he made?
Yeah.
His demeanor was calm and somber.
Well, he was just reading it off the prompter. I mean,
yeah, he was just reading, but it was a contrast from his speech from Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm.
A contrast, it's like a different Donald.
Yeah.
So
well, it was an actual speechwriter. I mean, when he speaks off the cuff, that you're actually getting what Trump thinks. When he's reading off the prompter, you're getting what they want you to think Trump thinks.
Yeah, I know. Well, thank you, and you have a good day.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. Very perceptive comments. Mike in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Mike, what's up?
I wanted to speak about the shooting Saturday night in Lawrence, Kansas, and I wanted to start before I commented, I wanted to ask you a question. You had started the show by saying that Senator Roberts from Kansas made a had a comment on Las Vegas, and I'm not trying to denigrate or downgrade that what happened there, but did he mention anything about Lawrence?
I didn't know that there was a shooting in Lawrence, Kansas. What did I miss?
Yep. Well, Saturday night, I think close to midnight, 3 people were gunned down in downtown Lawrence, Kansas. And I am a native Kansan, and I grew up in the southwest burbs of Kansas City. And my mother and my aunt grew up in Lawrence. They went to KU. My brother and my sister-in-law went to KU. So I've spent a fair amount of time in the city. And as I said, I'm not trying to denigrate what went on in Las Vegas, but there are three families right now that are mourning people that were, what I can understand, were gunned down.
Well, Mike, this is happening in the United States. We have an average of 91 people a day who are killed in the United States. If you define a mass shooting as 4 or more people being shot and killed at the same time by the same person, we're averaging 2 to 3 mass shootings a week in the United States. So, it's terrible what happened in Lawrence, and I'm sorry I was, not informed about it. And I agree with you, and Pat Roberts should be speaking out about this as well, as a senator from Kansas. But the fact of the matter is that this has so become the norm that it's not even remarked upon by our news media, unless it's like 50 people or 100 people are killed or injured, or, a member of Congress. In the case of Steve Scalise. So, we'll see where it goes. But, Mike, thanks for the call. Antoinette in Alameda, California. Hey, Antoinette, what's up?
I just wanted to put the shooting in Nevada in a bit of perspective. Back when we had we still have the Iraqi war kind of going on, but back in November of 2004 when we had the second battle in Fallujah, we had 54 Americans killed and 425, soldiers wounded. And people are saying, well, where did this guy come from? And folks don't know that Mesquite, Nevada is just minutes away from Bunkerville, Nevada, which is where they had the armed standoff at the Bundy Ranch with the militia and the feds a little while back.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And also, the way they knew where the guy was located was the smoke detectors went off in his room because he was shooting so much.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And a suppressor wouldn't have helped him with that.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay.
But he had the higher ground, corner room. I mean,
Yeah. Yep. Antoinette, thank you. Thank you for the call. Sean in North Platte, Nebraska. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a mental illness, and I'm on disability because of it, and I have no business owning a gun. But I think a lot of people in the same boat as me don't tend to recognize that. That a lot of people figure that maybe they tend to be wanting to own guns, and it's kind of disturbing. I've noticed that a lot. What do you think?
I think that it is not unreasonable for anybody who is so disabled by their mental illness that they can't work, and this is acknowledged by the Social Security Administration, to prevent that person from buying a gun, or at least put an obstacle in the way that they would have, if they're going to buy a gun, that they would have to present themselves to a local police department or something and demonstrate proficiency and competence, and demonstrate that the nature of their mental illness is not the kind of thing that would cause them to be more inclined to impulsively kill somebody else, or for that matter, commit suicide. Just having a gun in somebody in a person's home with no mental illness issues is a 500% increase in the probability of a suicide happening in that house.
Oh yeah.
So I continue to think that this was a big mistake that when Trump undid this rule that Obama put into place. Sean, thank you for the call and for your comments. We'll be back. There's still a lot going on. I want to talk about the two Santa Claus theory, too. I don't know if you saw my piece that was up on Alternet over the weekend. There's just a lot going on. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading an excerpt from Robert Wolfe's book, Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing. I wrote the foreword for it. Robert Wolfe just died just a few months ago, just this last year, in Hawaii. Louise and I visited him there a number of times. He was in his 90s. And back in the 1950s, he was an anthropologist and sociologist who had been hired by the Malaysian government to figure out why this one particular Aboriginal tribe, the Sonoy, who lived deep inside the jungle, hunting-gathering tribe, why they were, quote, lazy, why they were unwilling to work in the rubber plantations. And he got to know them, and he discovered that their view of the world was completely different than ours. And that's essentially what this book is about, and it's absolutely a mind-boggling book. I'll share a little. This is from the middle of the book. This is page 86. It's finally he's reached the point where they'll let him sleep in the village with them. He says, in time, I grew to know them better. But it was when I began to overnight in their villages that I learned that they literally lived in another reality. When it became dark, people huddled together for warmth and companionship. In the tropics, there's no long period of dusk. It grows dark quickly. The air would become cool, and people would move closer together, reaching out, touching a neighbor, perhaps holding hands. Women might run their fingers through the hair of the person sitting next to them. During the nights I stayed over, they would often gather around me and have me ask them questions. Then they would ask me questions, very quietly and softly. Our being together was not like other social situations I'd ever experienced. We talked, but softly. They did not know how to compete for attention. A few words now and then were all that were spoken, a question or a comment, a simple answer, long silences. Sometimes someone would have some tobacco and light a cigarette, a tobacco rolled into a leaf, which was passed around the group. People might ask each other whether they had noticed that particularly bright patch of sunlight on the side of the river behind a certain tree, or if they had noticed that large yellow bird that sang in the morning. Evening was a time of reflection, of gentle communication, of being together. I never knew their blood relationships, but evening times felt like family. As it grew later, one of the people would get up to go into one of the houses, more often little more than lean-tos or rickety huts on stilts, and fall asleep. Eventually, each of us had found an empty spot on the floor of one of the shelters, and wrapped in our sarongs, we huddled close to whoever else slept in that house that night. The houses did not belong to anyone. It seemed that each of the 4 or 5 little shelters was for all the people living in that settlement at that moment. We would fall asleep whenever we chose, and I'm sure with whomever we wanted to spend the night. Yes, people had sex, but even that was gentle, quiet, and discreet. Occasionally, someone might turn over and bump into a couple being a little too acrobatic or noisy, and there would be a grunt. Or people might move away from a couple that made too much to do about their lovemaking. Passionate lovemaking between young people often took place during the day, outside in a more hidden spot in the jungle, I was told. In the morning, we might not all wake up at the same time, but those who woke up early would lay quietly, waiting for more people to awaken. And somehow, as if by magic, we would find ourselves sitting in a circle, rubbing our eyes, stretching the kinks out. One person would say, I saw a bird, a beautiful bird. Someone else would say, yes, I too saw a bird. What kind of bird was it? Another would ask. And so they would create a story with images from our dreams. They did not think that they were sharing dreams as we think of dreams. The Sonoy believed that the world we live in is a shadow world, and that the real world is behind it. At night, they believe, we visit the real world. In the morning, we share what we saw and learned there. The story that was created around the memories that 4 or 5 people brought back from the real world set the tone for that day. Sometimes one of the group would take the lead in soliciting input from each person in the room. How about you? What do you remember? Other times, the story flowed without help. A few times, no story emerged at all. It was very obvious that when a more or less coherent story was created around the images we shared, we who had slept in that shelter would live that story that day. Usually, the stories were simple. A bird had shown the way to a tree that was bearing fruit. Later that day, some of us would find that tree, and of course, it did have ripe fruit. Or the story was about a bad storm, so people would stay close to the shelters all day, and yes, there was a big storm in the late afternoon. Occasionally, the stories were about things that affected all of them, all the people in the settlement, or perhaps even all the Sonoy. In that case, they would make it a point to share with the people who had slept in other shelters as soon as possible. It might take all morning to disseminate that story to everyone. I did not witness any attempts to call a meeting, but it was obvious that when a serious story came out of a morning's dream telling, all the people in the settlement would eventually hear that story. I learned about all of this very early during the time that I spent with the Sonoy. It was in what I thought of as the first village, the first settlement I visited, that an important story emerged from what I brought back from the real world during one of my nights there. It made a big impression on me because part of the story came from my dream. It was a particularly vivid dream about one of my family's dogs, an all-black mongrel that seemed to have come with the house we rented in the suburbs of Kuala Lumpur. We had tried to get rid of that dog. In fact, one of the first days after we moved we had run over to over the poor dog in the driveway, but he would not leave. We tried chasing him away. He kept coming back. So we adopted him and called him Jaga, which is Malay for guard or protector. I do not remember that Jaga was a particularly good watchdog, but he was around. And he goes on to tell his dream, and then it's just an absolutely fascinating story. Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing by Robert Wolfe.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The deadliest mass shootings in history, the trace, somebody's put together this graphic and tweeted it out. And it points out, Aurora, Colorado in 2012, 12 people dead, 58 injured. Birmingham, New York, 13 people dead, 4 injured. This is 2009. Fort Hood, Texas, 2009, 13 people dead, 32 injured. And then you get up to Orlando, 2016, 49 dead, 58 injured. And then Las Vegas, 50 killed, 400 injured. The headline, deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. And yet, when I look at Wounded Knee, it was between 150 and 300 Native Americans were killed and about 25 soldiers. So I would say and Wounded Knee certainly wasn't the only place where, there was these kinds of mass shootings going on. I'd have to go back and look at how many people died in the Ludlow massacre, but I know that there were a number of times when employers, took on their employees and killed them. I guess it's just a matter of defining terms, and what it looks like to me is that this guy basically committed suicide and took a bunch of people with him, and that's usually what's going on with these kind of mass killings, is that the person doing the shooting is, their end game is to be dead themselves, which leads me to wonder, there's this warning on these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor class or family of anti-anxiety drugs or antidepressant drugs. The drugs that Prozac is probably the most famous member of that family, or maybe it was the first. But the SSRI drugs can cause people to have what's called suicidal ideation. In other words, fantasies, imaginations about committing suicide. And because they diminish, now again, these drugs are very, very helpful for some people. They save some people's lives. So, I'm not saying we need to ban them or anything like that, but over and over and over again. When we look at these mass shootings, we discover that the mass shooters were on one of these drugs. Not always, but way too often for my comfort. And we don't know yet if this guy was on an antidepressant or not. But about 1 in 10 Americans is right now, so that's pretty grim. But what the SSRI drugs do is by they reduce your ability to feel empathy for other people or even experience the emotions of other people, which is really what feeling empathy is, as well as reducing your ability to feel your own emotions. That's the whole point of it, right? People who are overwhelmed by depression or overwhelmed by grief or overwhelmed by something terrible happening in their life, the theory is you take these drugs for a short period of time, get through that, of your dog just died sort of thing, or mom or dad just died, or whatever, lost your job. There are times when it's not inappropriate for people to turn to pharmaceuticals for a brief period of time to get through a rough patch. But when they do them over the long haul, then things tend to kind of change in the brain wiring, at least it appears. And viewing other people as things rather than as people, combined with suicidal ideation, combined with, constantly obsessively thinking about suicide, is the combination for mass slaughter. So, we'll see if this guy was on these drugs or not. But we keep having these incidents and we keep not having these conversations. And I think we should. Meanwhile, back on the 27th of last month, this was like a week ago, the New York Times editorial board wrote an op-ed about a form of gun control in California, Arizona, Utah, and Mexico that was really working well. And specifically what it was banning lead bullets in these places. And the reason why is because the California condor and other large birds, eagles, many of these other large predators, people would shoot smaller animals with lead shot and then, not always get them. And the condors and the eagles would eat these animals, which had the lead pellets in them, and they would die from lead poisoning. So, in fact, as the New York Times points out, the majestic, though vulturous California condor is once again soaring above the wilds. It was on the brink of extinction 30 years ago when the last 22 giant birds were captured in a desperate effort to breed them in captivity. There are now an estimated 450 condors with 270 freely swooping and scavenging in California, Arizona, Utah, and Mexico. So how did that happen? It was because the use of toxic lead-based ammunition by hunters was banned, right, by the California legislature. California condor population could not have rebounded if the California legislature had not bucked the NRA and passed this enlightened bill to ban lead ammo near the condor's nesting grounds. And this was done in 2008. And then in 2019, there is, a year and a half, there's supposed to be a ban on lead-based ammunition throughout California. Other states have partial controls on lead-based ammunition, but California was going to be the first to do it because it's so bad for the environment. It's also bad for hunters, by the way, and sportsmen and women. I mean, one of the things you will notice if you shoot guns is that you get lead dust all over your hands. And you want to wash it off very carefully, but it gets absorbed through your skin. And by the way, if it's dust, you're breathing it. But anyhow, the editorial board points out how successful this legislation was, this gun control legislation was in California in bringing back these wild predatory birds. And so what does the Trump administration do? The Trump administration, beholden to the NRA, quickly overturned a regulation the Obama administration had issued that would have banned lead ammunition and fishing tackle in federal wildlife refuges. Even when it comes to measures that can harm humans, Republican representatives tend to be equally servile toward the gun lobby. In the House, they're selling what amounts to a marketing favor for the gun industry, proposing to repeal controls on the sale of gun silencers to civilians. They end the op-ed. California stood up to the gun lobby and protected the condor. It's pathetic that Congress can't muster similar wisdom and courage on behalf of police officers. And that's just, I mean, this was like last week. So gun control actually does work. And yeah, it's not all that unusual that a mass shooter be somebody over 50. Travis Geddes over at Raw Story put together a list that said, the typical mass shooter is a white guy in his 30s or 40s. School shooters tend to be younger. But then they just looked through, James Hodgkinson, the guy who shot Steve Scalise. He was 66 years old. Getchachou Fedeke, 53. Robert Louis Deere was 57. John Hauser was 59. This Tea Party activist who opened fire at a showing of the movie Trainwreck, killing 2 people, wounding 9 others before fatally shooting himself. Rockne Newell, 59. William Spengler, 62. Michael Haines, 51. Timothy Hendren, 51. Jesse Warren, 53. Charles Cookie Thornton, 52. There's been a bunch of them. What is the common denominator? I don't think it's, I really don't think that the pharmaceutical piece of this is at the core of it. I think that there's overlap there. And, we need to be doing some really good and careful science to find out. But I think the biggest problem that we're facing right now is inequality. I mean, look at the work that James Wilkerson and Kate Pickett did with their books, The Spirit Level and Why Inequality Matters. And they found that as inequality goes up, so do homicides and so do mass killing. These are all symptoms of a society being torn apart by the wealthiest among us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after. And welcome back. Let's see here. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't know, a couple different things, but I don't want you to push the button and shut me off before I get a chance to say something to you. In reference to what happened last night, this dude was 64, which makes him a non-vet, and I would bet anything if there's a manifesto put out by him somewhere, maybe even his girlfriend knows, that a lot of this was because of the lies that the government's been telling us and continues to tell us. And the Vietnam War being, it's only been a week since, a week and a couple of days since Kim Burns' thing came on.
Yeah.
But that could have kicked it off as well. I mean, just solidified it in his mind that, there's no coming back from what we're in right now.
Yeah, it's not inconceivable that Vietnam damaged him and that something has recently triggered him. Who knows? I mean, we just
damaged him, and very well, if in fact that's what it was. It was a big lie, and we're in a lie right now.
Right.
We're in Afghanistan.
Right, and Iraq. Yeah.
Yeah. And there too.
And Syria and Libya.
Wherever we can get into. We're trying to get into Venezuela.
Yeah.
We just can't quit.
Yeah.
So my point is, I guess I've been watching you forever, man, and you got a great platform, and I just wish that you would do more complaining, griping, ranting, whatever you call it, about the continuous wars. I mean, Trump just got us into another 50 years or more over there chasing minerals now. We don't care about little Afghan girls going to school. Now we're there for the minerals.
Yep.
So I would love to hear you just do that. Use your platform to inform people,
Okay.
Instead of just these kumbaya moments that everybody wants to have and they want to go pray and, oh, yeah. I feel bad for them people, but things happen for a reason, And
well, not always. I think sometimes it's just, crap happens. But I get what you're saying, Scott. The fact of the matter is that the oligarch control of this, the oligarch takeover of our country in the 1970s, by and large, is when it happened. And then the oligarchs, of course, put Reagan in charge as president, and basically over the next 20 years took over, pretty much all the levers of government. And for a while there took over the Democratic Party as well, certainly through the 90s. And it has hollowed out the American middle class. We haven't been building infrastructure since the 80s because you can't pay for infrastructure if you're not going to tax rich people. And so, it's like, Reagan explained to us why we can't have nice things, because the rich people have to have their tax cuts, and their big corporations have to be able to, send their work overseas. And, this is just what's going on. And, whether it's related to this shooting or not, I have no idea. But the general spirit of the times, the zeitgeist, is not a good one right now. And Scott, thank you for the call. And so anything's possible. But I'm not gonna go off and say, oh, this is because of that. I want to wait and find out what's going on. Who is this guy really, and why did he do this? And we may never know. We may never know. But let's wait until we get at least a little more information. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Lynn in Mobile, Alabama. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to address the issue of some of these crazy gun laws that are being enacted. For instance, in Alabama, while we were courting a Remington manufacturing plant, a rash of just incredibly insane gun laws were brought out by the legislature. In the state of Alabama, used to be that the sheriffs in each county issued gun permits at their discretion. The law was changed to say, instead of may, to shall. We had a law proposed to give 16-year-olds the right to carry guns with their parents' permission, just as one example. Another law that was passed said that someone who had been institutionalized for mental health purposes could not be denied the right to own a gun. And this law was proposed a couple of years after a recently mentally ill patient was released and caused a disturbance in their home. The sheriffs were called, and in Baldwin County, a deputy sheriff was gunned down by this mentally ill person. Those are just some of the examples of, and this is all to court gun manufacturers and to pay back our bought and paid for politicians who are bought and paid for by the NRA.
Yeah, money
One
is...
other law said that you could not deny someone the right to carry a gun on any public property, and that included schools.
Whoa. Yeah, what we're looking at is the corruption of our political system by money. It's just that simple, and it almost doesn't. You can look at almost any topic, whether it's the opiate crisis, whether it's the lack of the media from in doing any kind of serious investigative reporting. If the dimensions of the obesity and diabetes epidemic in the United States that are caused by things in our food supply that aren't even foods. Pick something, right? In virtually every area you find that things that our lives are being corrupted, and our government's ability to protect us from predators is being weakened by these very wealthy predators and these corporate predators, and in this case, just apply it to the gun laws. Spot on, Lynn. Thanks for the information. I didn't know that. That's just disgusting. What's going on there. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yes, it's really the oligarchs that are responsible for creating what's going on today, but it was the will of the American people and even the Democratic Party that, put them in power to begin with. I've lived through that era, and, everybody was just enamored. We're all going to be rich. And, so we have to take a look at ourselves. And so to soft pedal, I think any kind of critique at this point is just not, because there was one caller who called in who was feeling very discouraged. But I think that just like, for instance, I critique myself, and I might go to, say, an AA meeting, I think our country needs to do the same. We need to take a long, hard look at where we're at, who we are as a people, and I think the rest of the world would join along with us. Ever since 9/11, we've just gone down that road, and, they have seized power. Yes, they have seized power. Then we need to fight them. I mean, I think, are we going to end up? I don't think it's, not, fathomable to say that we could end up like Nazi Germany, like fascist Italy, and I don't think we can endure that. The rest of the world can't either, because we have far more weaponry. They will slaughter us. That's what they really are after, is control. They absolutely could care less about you, me, your children, or anything else that is good, compassionate, kind. These people have gone over the edge themselves, and they've been empowered to do so. So that's where I'm at. But I don't think it's we need to face where we're at and then move on. And I think we have the power. We do have the power, but we need to fight them. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And we need to take a look at ourselves, too.
Yeah. I don't entirely disagree, John. I do think that blaming the victims is not generally useful, and the fact that so many of us actually believed Ronnie Reagan's sales pitch, I don't think makes us bad people. But I get what you're saying. John, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back after this.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
We're reading today from the Thom Hartmann Reader here at Thom Hartmann University. This is from page 13. The title is The Story of Carl. Carl loved books, and he loved history. After spending 2 years in the Army as part of the American occupation forces in Japan immediately after World War II, Carl was hoping to graduate from college and teach history, perhaps even at the university level, if he could just hang on to the GI Bill and his day job long enough to get his PhD. But in 1950, when he'd been married just a few months, the surprise came that forced him to drop out of college. His wife was pregnant with their first child. This was an era when husbands worked, wives tended the home, and being a good father and provider was one of the highest callings to which a man could aspire. Carl dropped out of school, kept his 9-to-5 job at a camera shop, got a second job at a metal fabricating plant, working with molten metal from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. For much of his wife's pregnancy and his newborn son's first year, he slept 3 hours a night and caught up on the weekends. But in the process, he earned enough to get them an apartment and prepare for the costs of raising a family. Over the next 45 years, he continued to work in the steel and machine industry. In the later years, as a bookkeeper manager for a Michigan tool and die company, as 3 more sons were born. Carl knew he was doing the right thing when he took that job in the factory, and he did it enthusiastically. Because the auto industry was unionized, he found he was able to support his entire family, all 4 sons, on one paycheck. He had a fully funded health insurance program, an annual vacation, and a good pension waiting for him when he retired. Carl had become a member of the middle class. He may not have achieved his personal dream of teaching history, but he had achieved the American dream. He was self-sufficient and free. Working with molten metal can be dangerous, but the dangers were apparent, and Carl took every protection to protect himself so that he could return home safely to his family. What he didn't realize, however, was that the asbestos used at the casting operation was an insidious poison. Didn't realize that the asbestos industry had known for decades that the stuff could kill, but would continue to profitably market it for another 20 years while actively using its financial muscle to keep the general public in the dark and prevent the government from interfering. A couple of years ago, Carl tripped down the stairs and ended up in the hospital with a compression fracture of his spine. He figured that fall had also caused the terrible pain he'd been experiencing in his abdomen and his chest. Doctors, however, discovered that his lungs were filled with mesothelioma, a rare form of lung cancer that is almost always caused by exposure to asbestos. Mesothelioma is terminal, and its victims die by a slow and painful suffocation. Just because some corporation put profit before people, Carl got screwed. I was Carl's first child. My dad faced a painful death, but at least his job in a union shop left him with health care after retirement. Most Americans don't even have that reassurance anymore. More than 45 million Americans don't have health insurance to cover expenses for a serious illness, and 5 million lost their health insurance between 2001 and 2005, which is when I wrote this. And it's not just illness that worries most Americans today. Americans are working more and making less, getting harder and harder to just get by. There's a reason for the pain Americans are suffering. The America my dad grew up in put people or profits. The America we live in now puts profits above people. In my dad's America, 35% of working people were union members who got a living wage, health insurance, and defined benefit pensions. These union benefits lifted all boats because they set the floor for employment. For every union job, there was typically a non-union job with similar pay and benefits, meaning roughly 70% of the American workforce back then could raise a family on a single paycheck. People who were disabled and couldn't work could live on Social Security payments, and the elderly knew that they would have a safe retirement, paid for by pensions, Social Security, and Medicare. The gap between the richest and the poorest had shrunk rather than widened. That America is disappearing fast. The minimum wage is not a living wage. Workers are now expected to pay for their own health insurance and their own retirement. Pension plans are disappearing. 30,000 General Motors employees lost theirs just in 2005, and there's continued talk about privatizing Social Security, the Republicans' grand goal. The safety net is ripping apart, and the results are that the middle class is shrinking. The rich are once again getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. The inflation-adjusted average annual pay of a CEO went up from $7.7 million to $9.6 million just between 2002 and 2004. Meanwhile, from 2002 to 2004, the inflation-adjusted median annual household income went down from $46,058 to $44,300. In other words, ordinary people's income went down by $1,600, while CEO pay went up by $1.8 million a year. From 2001 to 2005, America has lost 2,800 manufacturing jobs just in 3 years. If you don't count jobs produced by the military-industrial complex, the number of private sector jobs created since 2001 decreased by 1,160,000. Although 67% of large employees, well, you get where we're going with this. Anyhow, it's the Thom Hartmann Reader. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was just looking at I wrote a piece for Alternate this morning that's up at the top at alternate.org about the Second Amendment and how it's been so distorted, its original meaning, where it came from, protecting the slave patrols, trying to prevent a standing army. And and I was just looking at the comments. There's a discus comment thing associated with it. And the most recent comment was from a few minutes ago by Brent, somebody or other, and who wrote, "The right to bear arms," and it's B-A-R-E, arms. I think he meant B-E-A-R, arms, to carry, as opposed to, hey, I can, show you my elbow here. It's, you don't have the right to bear arms in Saudi Arabia if you're female, but you do in the United States. Anyway, the right to bear arms was, in fact, an amendment to give us, U.S. citizens, he writes, the power to overthrow a corrupt government. It was written and intended as a failsafe. Now, it astonishes me how many people believe this to be the case. That these people who created this government, the Washington, Jefferson, Madison crowd, that they sat around and said, we're creating an egalitarian country, a government where the right to happiness, the first founding document in the history of the world to have the word happiness in it, is the Declaration of Independence. We're creating a government, we're creating a nation that is holding happiness as a high value, the general welfare as a high value. But, this government might someday become so out of control and despotic that we've got to make sure that the average civilian, the average citizen, rather than just voting the bums out of office, can assassinate them. Right? We've got to make sure that the average American can kill the president or the Senate or the House or a senator or a House member. And that kind of thinking leads to things like, the assassination of McKinley or the assassination of Kennedy or the attempted assassination of Reagan or the attempted assassination of Gabby Giffords. And there's just no truth to it at all. Nowhere in any of the founding documents of this country, and I have read most of them, in none of the state ratifying discussions, where they're having their debates about whether or not to ratify the Constitution. And I've read the ratifying debates for at least 6 states. Nowhere in any of them did it say, we really need to have that Second Amendment so that we can shoot up our government if they become oppressive. It never even occurred to the founders. It's a stupid idea on its face. The mechanism for acquiring power on the part of the people, if the government goes out of control, is legislative. It's at the ballot box. The founders did not put a suicide clause in the Constitution and call it the Second Amendment. That's just wrong. I know the NRA has been promoting it forever, but no, none of the founders thought that we should have an armed populace so that they could take down the government that these people had just fought and died to create. None of them. They would have laughed at you if you had suggested such a thing. And yet this myth persists. It's amazing. Michael in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
How you doing? Yeah, Well, thank you for all of that.
You're welcome.
But yeah, my whole thought here was I am so sick and tired of Republicans offering their condolences and their prayers with NRA and gun lobby money hanging out of their pockets.
Yeah,
it's just so disingenuous and hypocritical, and they need to just shut the up.
Yeah. I am with you, Michael. It's the time has passed for prayers and condolences. It's time for some reasonable gun control legislation in the United States. It's just that simple. Michael, well said. Thank you for the call. Lou in Grandview, Indiana. Hey, Lou, what's up? Lou, you got to call back. You got to listen to your phone, not your TV. David in North Aurora, Illinois. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Many times you talk about the right-wing hate media, and you just mentioned a guy's name, Brett. I think his name is Winterball, and he's on the channel next to you. It's called Newsmax. And this guy is preaching things this morning. Let's don't talk about any remedies. Let's pray. And then to another channel down, it's called One American News. There's a crazy guy named Ledger. And he's spewing the same thing. I agree with you 100%. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Beverly in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Beverly, what's on your mind today? Beverly?
Hi, Beverly, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you today?
Hi, good. I wanted your opinion. You're so knowledgeable. I'm a registered nurse. I'm signed on to 2 medical disaster relief organizations that don't answer the phone. I'm wondering your opinion if I could fly myself to Puerto Rico and work on the Navy hospital ships.
I would suggest, Beverly, that you contact the Navy if you wanted to participate with USS Comfort. But
yeah, I don't know how. Where you go, where they'll pick up the phone.
Start with the recruiting offices because they always answer the phone.
Oh,
right.
All right. Yeah.
And beyond that, I mean, if you're offering to volunteer to help out the Navy, it seems like that would be helped. That would go through the recruiting offices.
All right. Okay.
The USS Comfort, though, has already left port. It's on its way heading down there. It was 5 days late, but it's already left port. But there's a lot of great organizations, Beverly. I would strongly encourage you not to try to just show up, to coordinate with an organization.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Good luck, and thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. Dave in Schenectady, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Tom, I'm very familiar with power generation on the islands like Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. Croix. The majority of power generation on those islands is by GE gas turbines. Also, on those islands, they typically have a water and power authority. In fact, in St. Thomas, for instance, it's Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority. So not only are they making electricity, but they're providing water for the island.
Right.
Now, I've volunteered. My company has been providing services down there for a long time. The problem is not in power generation right now. The problem is in Puerto Rico. It's transmission, distribution, and so on.
Right.
Now, I got a call back from my good friend on St. Croix. Let me just talk about St. Croix. Imagine that they have 4 GE gas turbines there that make about 80 megawatts total, 20 apiece. Right now, he told me he can only generate 4 megawatts.
Whoa.
So he only has 1 turbine running, and mainly it's because the infrastructure is so antiquated, far more antiquated than any place in the United States, in the mainland anyway.
You're talking about the transmission infrastructure.
Well, they don't have a long transmission lines because it's a small island.
Right.
But they have step-up transformers, short transmission lines, step-down transformers, and then distribution.
Right.
Where he can generate power, it's all underground. So he can only make about 4 megawatts of power.
Right.
If we think our infrastructure on the mainland is old, that their place it's worse than third world.
Yeah, no, I get that, and in fact, I've been there and seen it. It seems to me, Dave, that this could be a golden opportunity for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands to reinvent themselves as green power paradises.
Absolutely.
It's just the question is whether they will get the funding or the assistance to do that, or whether Trump is going to stick up. Is he going to stick up for the people of Puerto Rico, or is he going to stick up for Steve Mnuchin's business partner, who is sitting on billions of dollars worth of Puerto Rican bonds that he wants to get paid before Puerto Rico, digs itself out? And
good question. But if they're going to repair, they should modernize.
Oh yeah, and regionalize it. A power grid should in the modern world, a power grid should not be a principal distribution system. It should be a load balancing system, and most of the distribution should be generated at a local level. It literally from the rooftop of the house, or from a series of houses, or a small local generating station. But if you're using wind or solar, I mean, in particular, it gets very straightforward. And if you're in an island, you could also do, I would think, the tidal power, although that is not as well developed a technology. It seems to be working well where it does work. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a few minutes. We're going to check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world, and we'll continue taking your calls. The stories are continuing to come in about Stephen Paddock, the guy who was the killer in Vegas. Amazing story about his dad. I'll tell you after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It'll be the top story that Talk Media News has for us, so stick around. And welcome back. Richard, watching Free Speech TV in Houston, Texas. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind?
Yes, I was going to comment on the big stink they're making about the American anthem. Would you please quote the third verse of the American anthem, which is very offensive to African Americans? Can you please quote the third verse?
I don't have it in front of me, and I don't have it memorized, Richard. I know that it refers to Francis Scott Key's pleasure that freed slaves who were fighting on the side of the British were being killed in the battle, if my recollection is correct. Am I remembering it right?
Yes.
Okay.
But it also is saying something about African Americans being in the same realm of livestock or something. They don't even have us as humans.
Okay. Yeah, I know that the third verse is problematic, and as a national anthem, it's celebrating the victory in the War of 1812. Basically, that's what it was written for, and so it's okay, we won a war, and the flag was still standing, but what about America the Beautiful? It seems to me like celebrating the beauty of our country and the diversity of our country, and the standing waves of grain, the farming, the ability of our country to produce food and new technologies and things. It would be such a better national anthem, frankly. Plus, you can sing it.
I agree.
Star Spangled Banner, you can hardly sing it because it's got so much change in tone or pitch or register or whatever the word. Anyhow, Richard, good point. Thank you very much for the call. Matthew in Richardson, Texas. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
No. Earlier today, one of the callers brought up something about oligarchies, and part of me firmly believes that the U.S. was set up from, if you take a look at the history of voting rights. Because they initially believed you, unless you were a white property-owning man, they did not want you voting. Some states had variations of it, but it took about 200 years before voting was extended to everyone, regardless of race, creed.
Well, and it still isn't. I mean, you still have an entire Republican Party committed to getting young people, old people, and people of color off the voting rolls.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't, on the one hand, I don't totally disagree that, or I do agree that at the beginning, this country was set up along the lines of oligarchy in that basically wealthy people were the ones who were allowed to vote. That said, though, there was quite a discussion about this during the Constitutional Convention. And nowhere in the Constitution does it say that only men can vote. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that only white people can vote. And, you know, there were states operating under the Constitution post-1789, Delaware and Rhode Island, for example, where women voted, and there were states where freed blacks voted. In fact, in virtually all of the northern states, at least early on. And, you know, that got dialed back as we got into the 1880s, 1818s, the 1820s, and particularly during the Andrew Jackson administration, a lot of that got dialed back. And of course, it got wiped out after the Civil War. But so you could also argue that on the one hand that it was an oligarchy, on the other hand that it actually was aspiring to be actually a republic, a democratic republic. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us, Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So, bad news coming out of this horrible shooting. I have a story, I'm not sure. Oh, this is from the New York Post. Vegas gunman's psychopath father landed on FBI's most wanted list?
I don't know whether that's real or not.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of stuff coming out that's not real. Just a very quick summary, then I will tell you another piece of interesting news along those lines. That gunman perched on the 32nd floor of of a Las Vegas hotel casino unleashed a hail of bullets on the country music festival below. The last night of a 3-day festival, really the highlight of the festival, 22,000 people, killed at least 58 people, and at least 515 people wounded. At first, people didn't know what was happening, so they didn't even respond. People screamed and ran for their lives. Deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. So SWAT teams using explosives stormed the gunman's hotel room and found that he had killed himself. Now, it's not clear to me at this time whether he killed himself because he knew that they were coming in or at what time he killed himself. The gunman, Stephen Craig Paddock, 64-year-old retiree from Mesquite, Nevada, had as many as 10 guns with him, including rifles, they said. ISIS has claimed responsibility. The FBI is saying that as far as they can see, there is absolutely no connection with international terrorism at all. So now, in relation to something interesting that you just said about what the New York Post is reporting, the BuzzFeed News is doing a very good job reporting on hoaxes on the Internet. And in the hours after the massacre, Google search results were promoting misinformation about the alleged shooter because users on the message board site 4chan identified the wrong man. And and were promoting this, and the man they were promoting was a man with the same last name as the shooter's alleged companion, who is, by the way, out of the country, Mary Lou Danley. So this is a man whose last name is Danley and who is supposedly a Facebook friend of this woman. And this man seems to have a number of Facebook interests that are left-wing. So 4chan has been promoting this. Now, links to these posts by 4chan have been appearing at the top of search results on Google for the misidentified man's name. So that's now sort of stopped. Google has not immediately responded when asked to comment. So what's now happening, if you search for this man's name, mostly it's turning up stories debunking the misinformation. And Google has been increasingly scrutinized over its search result algorithms, which some are saying that did help spread misinformation during last year's presidential campaign by elevating questionable stories and outlets. The Gateway Pundit published, which is a right-wing news site, published an entire story promoting this man as the shooter long after Paddock had been identified as the shooter.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Democrats are demanding action from Congress and the White House to impose new restrictions on gun sales. And Vice President Joe Biden, former Vice President, saying there's no excuse for inaction. Former Representative Gabrielle Giffords has been holding a press conference. Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, said today that he will not participate in a moment of silence on the House floor for victims of the deadly mass shootings. He said, as after #Orlando, I will not be joining my colleagues. He said it just becomes a moment for inaction. Now is not a moment for silence. It's a time for action. Right. Also, Nelba Marquez Green, whose 6-year-old daughter was killed in Sandy Hook, she tweeted in a series of 18 tweets that Congress is to blame. This is on every congressperson who said in 13, there is simply nothing we could do. And she criticized the idea the shooting was a result of political divisions that have arisen since Trump's election. Oh, please, Newtown happened well before Trump was elected, she wrote. We need sensible gun legislation, and we need it now.
Yep.
So, quite a lot of news on that front. I had an interesting experience just now. I thought, I'll do a story on the latest on Puerto Rico.
Okay.
I had a remarkably hard time finding a story on Puerto Rico.
Really?
It's disappeared. It's disappeared.
Really?
I literally had to go to Google News and type in Puerto Rico and wait for search results to come up. CNBC, and it turned out Reuters, seemed to be the only outlet that had done a story within the last 2 hours. Most stories appeared to be several hours old.
Wow. So is this a symptom of, the news media always chasing the one big story, and in this case that's the shooting?
It seemed to be. I mean, it's just not on the front page. I mean, there are other stories being done. It's very hard. It's not on the front page.
It's like the inability of the media to walk and chew gum at the same time is breathtaking.
It's breathtaking. It was breathtaking to me. It has literally disappeared. This despite the fact that President Trump is slated to travel to Puerto Rico tomorrow.
Yeah. And then I also heard he's going to Vegas on Wednesday.
He's going to Vegas on Wednesday. He's already made remarks this morning, and he's leading a moment of silence this afternoon.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if they were leading a moment of legislation? Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
Great talking with you. We'll be back with more the news of the day and your thoughts on it, and mine as well, right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader. This particular chapter is an excerpt from my book Threshold, by the way. But this is from page 312 of the collected, kind of my collected writings, as it were. It's titled Sociopathic Paychecks. And it starts out with a quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince, 1943. I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence. And that makes him swell up with pride. But he is not a man, he is a mushroom. Okay, to the book. Americans have long understood how socially, politically, and economically destabilizing are huge disparities in wealth. For this reason, the U.S. military and the U.S. civil service have built into them systems that ensure that the highest paid federal official, including the president, will never earn more than 20 times the salary of the lowest paid janitor or Army private. Most colleges have similar programs in place, with the ratios ranging from 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 between the president of the university and the guy who mows the grass. From the 1940s through the 1980s, this was also a general rule of thumb in most of corporate America. When CEOs took more than their fair share, they were restrained by their boards so that the money could be used instead by the company for growth and to open new areas of opportunity. The robber baron J.P. Morgan himself suggested that nobody in a company, including his company, should earn more than 20 times the lowest paid employee. Although he exempted stock ownership from that equation, he owned most of the stock. During the greed is good era of the 1980s, something changed. CEO salaries began to explode at the same time that the behavior of multinational corporations began to change. When Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, a mergers and acquisition mania filled the air, and as big companies merged to become bigger, they shed off redundant parts. The result was a series of waves of layoffs as entire communities were decimated, divorce and suicide rates exploded, and America was introduced to the specter of the armed, disgruntled employee. Accompanying the consolidation of wealth and power of these corporations was the very real redefinition of employment, from providing a living wage to people in the community to a variable expense on a profit and loss sheet. Companies that manufactured everything from clothing to television sets discovered that there was a world full of people willing to work for 50 cents an hour or less. Throughout America, factories closed and a building boom commenced among the Asian tigers of Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand. The process has become so complete that of the millions of American flags bought and waved after the World Trade Center disaster, 9/11, most were manufactured in China. Very, very, very few things are still manufactured in the United States outside of the defense industry, weapons. And it wasn't unthinking, unfeeling corporations that took advantage of the changes in the ways the Sherman Antitrust Act and other laws were enforced by Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr. administrations. It took a special type of human person. In his manuscript, Toys, War, and Faith, Democracy in Jeopardy, Major William C. Gladish suggests that this special breed of person is actually a rare commodity and thus highly valuable. He notes that corporate executives make so much money because of simple supply and demand. There are, of course, many people out there with the best education from the best school, raised in upper-class families who know how to play the games of status, corporate intrigue, and power. The labor pool would seem to be quite large. But Gladish points out there's another and more demanding requirement to meet. They must be willing to operate in a runaway economic and financial system that demands the exploitation of humanity and the environment for short-term gain. This is a disturbing contradiction to their children's interest and their own intelligence, education, cultural appreciation, and religious beliefs. It's the second requirement, Gladish notes, that drastically reduces the number of quality candidates for corporations to pick from. Most people in this group are not willing to forsake God, family, and humanity to further corporate interests in a predatory financial system. For the small percentage of people left, the system continues to increase salaries and benefit packages to entice the most qualified and ruthless to detach themselves from humanity and become corporate executives and their hired guns. One of the questions often asked when the subject of CEO pay comes up is, what would a person like William McGuire or Rex Tillerson, the CEOs of United Healthcare and ExxonMobil, respectively, possibly do to justify a $1.7 billion paycheck or a $400 million retirement bonus? It's an interesting question. If there's a free market for labor or CEOs, you'd think there'd be a lot of competition for the jobs. And a lot of people competing for the positions would drive down the pay. All the United Healthcare stockholders would have to do to avoid paying more than $1 billion to McGuire is find somebody to do the same CEO job for $500 million. And all they'd have to do to save even more is find somebody to do the job for a mere $100 million. Or maybe even somebody who'd work the necessary 60-hour weeks for only $1 million. So why is executive pay so high? I've examined this question with both my psychotherapist hat on and my amateur economist hat on, and only one rational answer presents itself. CEOs in America make as much money as they do because there really is a shortage of well-trained sociopaths. The book is, ultimately it's from Threshold, but it's in the Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mentioned at the... My microphone is... Oh, it's... Apologies. My microphone had just disintegrated. Literally, it disintegrated. Oh, my. Okay, the Las Vegas massacre has already surpassed, writes Jacob Sugarman, an alternate, already surpassed the carnage at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, as the largest mass shooting in U.S. history. Again, I would say in recent U.S. history, or the largest mass shooting of white people in U.S. history. At least 58 people have been killed and more than 500 treated for injuries. Their blood still drying on the Vegas Strip. The nation is reeling. As of Monday morning, stocks for more American outdoor brands, previously Smith & Wesson, and Sturm, Ruger and Company, were up 7% and 6% respectively. These numbers will come as little surprise to lobbyists and industry insiders. Data indicate that gun sales spike in the wake of mass shootings as consumers stock up in anticipation of government reforms limiting access to these kind of weapons. That's incredible. So 6%, 7%. Hey, there was a mass shooting. Let's buy some stock. This is what it's come to in America. Jim in San Diego. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Good. So I listened to the Joy Reid show yesterday on Meet the Press. Did you happen to see it?
I did not.
Okay. Well, people like you and I are got to get a grip, according to Joy Reid, that the white guys, I've been in the Democratic Party for 60 guys, we got to understand that the Democratic Party is now a party exclusively of color, social issues, and we've got to be sure that we understand that, and we're not going to ever reach out to the Archie Bunker or the white people again. And I know she's just one voice, but the reason why I called is people like you, and I consider myself in that vein, have worked tirelessly, and I was a basketball coach, so I I worked in inner city schools, worked tirelessly for promotion of minorities and besides economic issues. But if we don't get a coalition of all people and stop saying if a person believes in abortion, he can't be a Democrat, or if a person wants economic issues, he can't be a strong Democrat, we have no hope of winning major elections again, in my opinion. And that's what I wanted to tell you, and I'd like to see what your comment on that is.
Yeah. In my opinion, the Democratic Party needs to clearly define what it stands for. I mean, it can also define the things that it stands against, and in fact should, obviously, but the things that it stands for are the things that need to be really emphatic. And you know, it's getting there. I mean, you know, it's the better deal thing that's coming along. It's you know, making the government the employer of last resort, and health care for all, free education for everybody. I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff. I think that the Democrats are on the edge of a significant upswing, and we've been seeing this in a number of these elections. So, Jim, I'm a little more sanguine about it than you are, and I think I believe it's moving in the right direction. John in Buckeye, Arizona. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, John. What's up?
Thank you for taking my call. Sure. I believe the problems that we've been discussing this morning and that we're experiencing in our society are a direct result of our economic system, essentially capitalism. For my Christian brothers and sisters, capitalism is anti-Christ. Christ was a socialist, not a capitalist. If we are a Christian country, a Christian society, we should be socialist, caring for others. Capitalism elevates money above people. Numbers in some computer somewhere are the most important thing in capitalism. More important than people, more important than the environment, more important than life itself. Unrestricted capitalism is a cancer that will destroy us all. If everyone in our country had a basic income, had health care, had a safe place to live, and we ended these endless wars, then the frustration and the problems that people experience in their day-to-day lives would be reduced to such a level that I don't think we'd have as many of these shooters as we now have.
My recollection is that the first guy who did this kind of shooting was Richard Speck back in the early 70s at the University of Dallas, wasn't it? The University of Texas in Dallas. As I recall, he climbed up into that clock tower and shot a bunch of people. And Bobby Kennedy talked about it, so it had to be in the mid-'60s. But that this is a relatively recent phenomena, just like in the 7,000-year history of Iraq. The oldest, arguably the oldest civilized, at least with regard to Western civilization, the oldest civilized country in the world. It's where Samaria used to be, where Ur and Uruk were, the cities that Gilgamesh built. And, it was 1966, it was Charles Whitman. Where did I get Richard Speck from? He must have been somebody else. Yeah, Whitman's rifle, that's what Bobby Kennedy. Thank you, Troy. In any case, that this is, I don't disagree, John, that capitalism is a basic problem, and regulated capitalism is a solution for it. Not sure where I was going with that thought when we got Whitman in there, but anyway, John, what have I missed here?
Well, it's the problem with capitalism is that we constantly are fighting these endless wars. We're going out, denying other people the rights to their property, and for our corporations, and for our corporations' greed. And it all has to do with putting money on a pedestal. And money is elusive. It's something that's
money's an abstraction.
It's not
ultimately.
real.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you, and it's not. In my opinion, the problem isn't capitalism in and of itself. It's the way that we're executing capitalism. I don't think that you're ever going to get away from capitalism, but it is possible, and I believe, to regulate it to the point where it's more benign and less destructive. Because the problem of just raw capitalism is so well demonstrated by the game Monopoly, which was invented back in the 1920s as a way of showing people the inherent danger of unrestrained capitalism and why you need anti-monopoly laws, to promote competition and prevent basically one person from ending up owning everything, which is what happens, in that kind of a situation. So anyhow, John well said. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing today, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Okay. This is not what I was going to talk about, but the guy, I just would like to piggyback off the last caller.
Mm-hmm.
I, for one, love capitalism. I don't like unfettered capitalism. I don't like capitalism that doesn't have government regulations, where corporations can, like you just said, form monopolies where they control everything in the market, and the consumer is locked out to whatever prices they deem fit. Mm-hmm. There's no competition, and with no competition, they can hire and fire workers as they please, because with competition, they would always keep the door open for the best workers possible.
Yep.
Yep. And that's where we suffer. But I didn't really want to get deep into that. I wanted to get deep into Wayne LaPierre.
Into what?
Today,
I'm sorry?
Wayne LaPierre.
Oh, yeah. Mr. NRA, yeah.
Yeah, I would love to see his press conference. I mean, I want somebody to stick a microphone in his face and let him tell us, out of that whole crowd of people that was running, who could have fired back at that guy and why they didn't shoot him. Because Nevada is an open carry state. And then this morning, the weirdest thing happened to me in months. I was listening to Fox News, and their morning show with Brian Kilmeade, he actually said that if there was a shooter that had shot at the guy, I'm paraphrasing him, but if there was somebody that was shooting at the shooter, that would have made him run into the hotel and probably killed people in the hotel. So basically, they was at a loss of words. This is what they have created. Yeah. And in some ways,
that's so bizarre. Plus, if there was a shooter shooting at the hotel, I mean, unless the guy was an expert marksman, this was the 32nd floor, right? He would be shooting out the windows of other people's hotel rooms.
Exactly. So, but the saddest thing is, it seemed like someone was relieved that this did happen, because they know they've gone over the edge as far as this gun rights and stuff. They know what they've been building up, and now they're trying to trying to retract some of that stuff at Fox News. I'm telling you, that's what it looked like to me. It was kind of crazy. It was surreal.
Yeah.
It's like, they've opened Pandora's box.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest problem they've got at Fox News is that the president is watching and repeating what they say. They could lie before and everybody just ignored it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But when Trump repeats lies that he sees on Fox News, then it makes it pretty obvious that Fox News is lying. And that's getting uncomfortable, shall we say. Welcome back. Okay, let's see here. Lou, watching Free Speech TV in Grandview, Indiana. Hey, Lou, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's sure nice to hear your voice and to talk to you. I've been a lost soul for years, and I finally found Free Speech TV, and I can't get away from it. So I appreciate all the comments that you make.
It's a great network.
I certainly appreciated your comment about people reading books and the idea that you mentioned about Ronald Reagan being informed for the FBI. I've known that for 30 years, and nobody listened to me. So
yeah.
But the reason I called, and then I also see it on Plutocracy, show you had on Free Speech TV. In 1884, Rutherford B. Hayes said that America was of the corporation, by the corporation, for the corporation.
Yeah.
So,
and in 1886 or 87, I forget which year it was, Grover Cleveland was president, and in his
annual State of the Union address, essentially, he said that the iron heel of the corporate master is upon the neck, the iron boot heel of the corporate master is upon the neck of the average worker. I mean, this is,
and still today, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is 1886 or 87. You could look it up.
I tried to call a number of times to you because I've always had a lot to say. I just never knew how to say it, and I'm not very diplomatic about how I say things. So I appreciate how you come across because I don't know if anybody else is listening to you, but. And one other comment I'd like to make is that, kind of in honor of my dad, is that if he was alive today, he would be broken-hearted. He was a 32-year veteran of the military, fought in 3 wars, and this would break his heart to see this happening right now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
The reason I called, because when you were mentioning mass shootings, and you mentioned Wounded Knee, I lived in South Dakota for 27 years or something like that, and at the Black Hills National Cemetery in Sturgis, South Dakota, there's one, maybe 2. I know for sure one because I've seen it. Soldier that was buried there for the Medal of Honor for Wounded Knee. So I don't know if you knew that or anybody in America does. America's not very smart on its own history.
So you're saying that the American soldiers who massacred the Indians got medals of honor for doing so?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And almost all the people that were killed there, of course, were shot by their own men because they had them in a crossfire. And so they were standing across from each other and they were shooting each other.
Huh.
So, yeah, so I mean,
but there were, as I recall, I mean, it's been a while since I read it, but my recollection is that there was about 300 Native American fatalities and around 25 soldiers who died.
Right, something like that.
Yeah.
It's just the idea that he's even buried there. And there's been protests there before. And I just moved out here to Indiana just a couple of months ago, but I never heard anything about what happened to that. About that, because they had protests about why is that guy got a Medal of Honor? Why is he,
right?
Really, you need to take that stone down. But of course, I'm sure nobody listened to any of those people either.
Yeah. Do you recall what year Wounded Knee was, Lou?
1890.
1890. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I'm a history buff, so I know a lot of stuff. So that's why I enjoy your program.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Lou, thanks.
I've got a lot to say about a lot of things because I just see that I talk to people. My daughter came up with a good one. She goes, Dad, this is a cartoon country. Because,
yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Lou, I got to run. I'm sorry, but thank you for the call. When was the last time?
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and John in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning. How you doing today?
Good. What's up?
You were talking about capitalism, and we used to have it regulated to eliminate greed, and they did. And with the Reagan era, they took away that to declare war on the middle class. And I think Democrats have largely lost the blue collar vote and switched to representing the top 10%. Because blue collar workers can't even afford to contribute to campaigns anymore.
Yeah.
They just don't have the extra disposable income to even contribute $100. So I don't know how we're going to get money out of politics.
We have to do it through political will. We have to be willing. We have to elect politicians
who are willing to get money out of politics. And that's a big lift right now, given that the economy is...
That in the Supreme Court, which I want to ask you.
That's where you've got to elect a president, who's going to appoint people to the Supreme Court. And this is why Mitch McConnell's treason against the United States, refusing to allow a seated president of the United States to even have a hearing on his own nominee for the Supreme Court for a year. I mean, this is beyond obscene. This is unconstitutional. This is impeachable. What Mitch McConnell did is just unspeakably wrong. Mitch McConnell himself should be impeached from the United States Senate for what he did, for refusing to allow Merrick Garland to even have a hearing. And if Merrick Garland were on the court, then there's a possibility that some of this craziness could get undone. But with Neil Gorsuch on there, the guy who just gave a speech to a bunch of right wingers at the Trump Hotel, when coming before his own Supreme Court is a case where, we're suing, we the people are suing Trump for not just, disposing of his business and, for the emoluments clause and all that stuff. I mean, this is just, it's not going to be a good thing, and it's not going to be an easy thing. So, that's where I'm at on that. John, thanks for the call. Hauke in Berlin, Germany. Hey, Hauke, what's up?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I hope you enjoyed your recent stay in Germany.
I love Germany. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, did you feel somehow unsafe without additional gun protection?
I beg your pardon?
Did you feel somehow unsafe without additional gun protection?
Oh, yeah, because it's really, really hard to get a gun in Germany. No, I did not. I felt quite safe in Germany, as I always have in Germany.
That's nice. Okay, Tom, please remind me, when was the last time when a privately owned gun saved someone from a mass shooting?
I don't know of any time when a good guy with a gun stopped a bad guy with a gun in a mass shooting. In fact, when Gabby Giffords was shot, there were two guys with guns in that crowd, and both of them were able to pull their guns. Neither one of them could get a shot at the shooter, and they were afraid that they would kill bystanders instead, and so they ended up not shooting at all. Which is, thank God.
Was it Sandy Hook where the NRA argument was that armed teachers would have prevented that massacre?
Right.
Or was no one can tell me that of all the gun victims in the USA alone this year, that none of them were armed.
Right. Yeah.
A gun is a damn poor tool for defense.
Yes, I agree.
Over 50 people are dead now. How many survivors of this massacre alone are now ruined for life?
Yeah.
Health-wise and medical bill-wise.
Well, not only the 500 who have been physically wounded, but the probably thousands of people who are in that audience who are going to have PTSD until the day they die.
Exactly.
I mean, their lives have been changed. And all these families. Hauke, thank you. I'm out of time, but thank you for the call from Germany. And thank you for watching our program on YouTube. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day after this.
Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries, They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. Welcome back. Bob in Seattle, Washington. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. You had a caller earlier about the Second Amendment and how we had to have guns so they could take over a government that they don't like.
Yeah, I wasn't a caller. I was reading one of the comments on the article that I wrote for Alternet today. But yeah.
I think you ought to refer to Article 1, Section 8, point number 15. It says, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions.
Yeah. Yeah, which is the exact opposite of the militia is here to take down the government if the government becomes oppressive.
Exactly.
It's the exact opposite.
Stop that.
Thank you for that, Bob.
Forward to stop that.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. It is such a, for some reason, this idea that the founders wanted us all to have guns so that we could kill government officials if the government ever became oppressive really appeals to Republicans or conservatives or gun nuts or something, but it makes absolutely no sense. And like I said, there's no reference to anything even remotely close to that. Read the Federalist Papers, read James Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention, which were detailed and exhaustive and weren't published until I think almost 50 years after the Constitutional Convention itself. I mean, read these things. You'll discover that was the last thing in their mind. They were trying to avoid having too strong a military, and they also were trying to provide for Georgia, South and North Carolina, and Alabama to maintain, as I recall, it was Alabama, to maintain their slave patrols. I mean, that's what they were trying to do. Anyhow, Bob, thanks.
It's crazy for them to start a government that they're planning on overthrowing. It doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's start this government and put a suicide switch in it. All right? No, you don't do that. Excellent, Bob. Thank you for that. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I just drove past Grover Cleveland's house in Colesville, New Jersey. But
remarkable.
Yeah, as you were saying, I think what the gun owners cling to is that one line, which is probably out of context, from Jefferson talking about, watering the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots or something.
Yes. Yeah.
And they interpret that into an insurrection or something.
Yeah, and he said that, by the way, before we were a country, and this was in the 1770s. He said that, and it's we just fought a bloody Revolutionary War. Right. And I think the phrase was, every generation the tree of liberty needs to be watered by the blood of patriots. But I don't think that he was referring to, our country, every generation having a civil war. In fact, I guarantee you he was not referring to that. But in any case, yeah, you're right, Bill. But he was not talking about, the Second Amendment. Not even close. So, did you call about Puerto Rico too, Bill?
Right. Yes, I did. Sorry. It's such a waste. First of all, they should be dropping in water for purification systems like they do almost for free in Africa by the Peace Corps. In every community, they should have a backup water system.
Yep.
The other thing is, it's such a sleeper of a jewel of a place if you've ever been there. It's been so underrated and ruined by crime. This would be a good time to pour infrastructure money into there, redo the whole island, because it's going to have lots of competition from Cuba when they finally, are allowed to.
Yeah.
And it's Americans, and you're giving them work. And by the way, to me, the most moral type of capitalism is investing in municipal bonds. and because you're giving money into the community to help them. And listen here, billionaires, you don't have to pay any federal income tax on it. And if you do it in the same state that you live in, you don't pay any state income tax.
Yep.
So even though it's low right now because rates are low, around 3%, if you get 6% with taxes, that's not too bad these days. If you're a billionaire, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you're putting money morally into where it should go.
Yep.
I mean, that's my thought on it. And they should have some sort of a big plan for the island to turn it back into a resort.
I suspect that they do, but it's going to be more like disaster capitalism. I mean, you've got probably some of the big hotel companies and casino companies licking their lips and going, okay, what can we buy up for pennies on the dollar to turn it into something else?
Right.
Which is, I guess, how it works. But as opposed to our doing a Marshall Plan kind of thing, which is what I think we should be doing, and I think it's what you're talking about, Bill. And let's rebuild Puerto Rico as a jewel. Let's solarize every single house. Let's make it energy independent and economically independent. I mean, there's so much that could be done with
rainforest. It's beautiful there.
Yeah, it's
incredible.
Yeah, it's a 100 by 30 mile island.
Right. I was there when I was a kid in the '60s, and we checked into the Ponce Hotel or something. That was brand new, intercontinental, big towering thing, and we were one of the first guests. My brother went back there 2 years ago, and it's covered in jungle. It's all covered over.
Wow.
The vines have taken it back.
Wow. Yeah. Well, Puerto Rico's been having, a real serious tough time economically, and no thanks to billionaires on Wall Street messing with their bonds. Excellent points, Bill. Thank you very much for the call. Grace in Detroit. Hey, Grace, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Regarding the gun issue, just touching briefly, we all understand that those gun laws were imposed on us through ALEC, Koch's corporate written rules, basically. And what I found last week were two things that were significant in my mind. Number one, there's it's called the Checks and Balances Project, which indicates that there are 70% of White House senior level officials with directly linked ties to Koch. And then I'm looking at the Guardian article that they had a recent meeting, a weekend donor retreat, attended by at least 18 elected officials. And the Koch brothers are warning that they are closing their piggy bank until they get tax reform passed and Obamacare repealed. They say they got about $300 to $400 million, but it's going to sit closed down until they get those two pushed through. Isn't that a form of extortion?
Yeah.
It's like it's not bad enough that in my particular state of Michigan, we've had hundreds of ALEC laws shoved down our throats, literally.
Yeah.
Now look at the problem we have with the gun the legislation on guns.
Yeah.
They were forced on us, and Koch's impact on that. And they fly under the radar. What can we do to highlight the fact that we have basically a pseudo-government?
I talk about it. It seems that that's pretty much the only way to do it. And I noticed, in previous years, you would hear cable news shows and hosts openly talking about the influence of the Koch brothers on politics. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Koch Industries started throwing lots of money at the networks with advertisements saying, look at how wonderful we are, we're Koch. And all of a sudden, all reference to the Koch brothers just vanished from television. And
I would venture to say that it's a little more than a convenience or an accident, because I did read the minutes of the meeting of the ALEC meeting that they held in Chicago a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in that meeting, those meeting notes, they specifically stated that they want to replace some of the media personnel with their own men. And there were two reasons given for that. They want to keep their name from the media, and they want to make sure that people hear the news, the information that they want them to hear. So I would imagine at this point that they've succeeded in that also.
Well, they have their billionaire buddy, Rupert Murdoch, owning Fox, and now you've got Sinclair fixing to hit 72% of the American population, with Trump TV. It's a pretty grim media landscape out there. I'm with you, Grace. Grace, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. Welcome back. Chris, watching Free Speech TV in Capitola, California. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. And I think that the platform that gentleman was talking about that you have is our platform, and I'd like to thank you for it. That's what makes your show great.
Thank you.
You there?
I am. I said thank you, Chris.
Listen, I wanted to ask you a question, Tom.
Sure.
I've heard about, in historical studies and all that stuff about the Pinkerton people that Wells Fargo hired to wipe out settlers and farmers that were trying to make a meager living here in the West. And I've also heard stories about in the early 1900s when, the unions were starting to form and all that, how the United States government would, they'd send in the army to kill these people, to stop them from having a vote and stop them from forming a union and all that.
Yep.
Let me just say one little short story before I ask you a question about a cat named Trailer. I knew a cat named Trailer. And as everybody does, you take a little twig and, you spank its little butt a little bit, and the cats get their paws and they slash at the twig, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this cat, Trailer, didn't. Trailer looked you right in the eye. He knew where that was coming from. And he'd scare you because he looked like he wanted to rip your eyes out. It was like, oh, my God, I've never seen a cat know where it's coming from. They usually just play with the stick.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, my question is, how come everybody's not as smart as that cat Trailer? Everybody wants to attack each other or the government, and that person that's swashing that stick on our ass is the 1%ers. Why doesn't anybody, or has anyone in the history of the United States camped out on their front yards and threatened them?
Yeah, actually.
They're doing to us?
Yeah. The first time that happened, we called it the American Revolution. The second time that happened, arguably, it was Teddy Roosevelt in 1901 through 1908. With the trust buster going after big corporations, passing the inheritance tax.
People actually went to their houses.
Oh, there were Krista Freeland, I believe, is the name of the woman who used to be the editor of the Financial Times. And she wrote a book about inequality that starts in the 1890s and points to this one particular party that was held in New York City by, I think it was the Astors, but it was one of the very, very wealthy families. And it was so opulent, this party, and it was so over the top that this was like the tipping point. Up until this party, the New York media was always celebrating these very, very wealthy people. And people came out in the streets. People were so offended by this that after this party, the media was basically picking on the really wealthy people. And, it represented a real significant sea change. It was the beginning of the progressive movement in the United States. And Krista Freeland's book on that was just absolutely fascinating. It came out about 3 years ago, as I recall. And I think she's now got a gig she's Canadian. I think she's got some sort of an administrative gig now. But yeah, there's lots of precedents where people rose up against oligarchy. I mean, the French Revolution's another one. That's right. She's the Minister of Foreign Affairs now.
Billionaires' houses or these billionaires' houses to their mansions, their castles, or wherever they are, and say, "Hey, we're at your front door, not the."
Well, most of them are in gated communities or have severe security around them. Is the one problem. I remember when Cindy Sheehan organized a bullhorn visit to George W. Bush's house after he left the White House. I was there with her down in Texas, and we couldn't get inside the neighborhood. It was a gated community, with security. Chris, thanks for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Brian in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I quickly just wanted to mention that every time the Republicans bring up this idea of tax reform, we should push back with what I'm calling welfare reform.
Okay.
It's a takeoff on welfare reform and wealth, but it's welfare reform. Anyway, Tom, what I called about was gun control, and specifically Steve Scalise. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes piece that Nora O'Donnell did on him.
I did not, but I did see that he returned to the House of Representatives a couple days ago.
Yeah, it was a very triumphant return, and she focused on all of the rehabilitation that he's doing, which is all well and good.
Right.
But,
has his opinion of gun control changed?
Not focus on at all were first of all, that you were talking earlier about a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun. That might be an example, but of course, the Capital District Police are, they carry a firearm as part of their job, so I don't think it really falls into the NRA meme. But no mention of whatsoever, at least as I understood it, there was an African American police officer that was so key to stopping the shooter. So, no mention whatsoever of that. And then no mention of, Steve Scalise, I can only assume, has been a proponent of, stopping any kind of gun control. So, he was never asked about that. And then he's going through this massive rehabilitation process. What is that costing, and how is that being provided?
I'd just love to know what his position is on gun control now that he's had this experience. And I honestly don't know, and that's why I haven't been, riffing on it or commenting on it. And I'm guessing, Brian, I didn't see the 60 Minutes piece, but I'm guessing that probably 60 Minutes didn't touch that topic. They didn't ask him what his position on gun control was, or if it had evolved as a consequence of being the victim of gun violence?
No, not at all. And they didn't ask him about his position on health care reform after he receives this Cadillac
healthcare
treatment, which is all well and good.
That's journalistic malpractice. That's really unfortunate. If it is as you described it. Brian, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. That's a bummer. Ryan in Webster City, Iowa. Hey, Ryan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Everybody and the brothers is talking about the shooter there in Las Vegas. I was watching a free speech over the weekend, a program about pharmaceutical drugs and the cocktail that some of these doctors are giving. Now, I can't speak for all the shooters that we've been having or had, but this particular guy, after seeing that program, I'm thinking, well, isn't the FBI going to check his medical, see if he had some kind of cocktail? There was another gentleman that called earlier about being a Vietnam veteran, and way back a few years back when the CIA did some things with the military, giving experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But this one particular shooter, after watching that program on free speech, it really got my attention. And I'm thinking, everybody's thinking, well, the guy's nuts, he's not a terrorist guy, but I think the easiest thing to find out was the guy on medication. The doctors, they like to give kids, young kids, start them out on Ritalin, and it goes from there.
Yeah. I raised this question earlier, and we'll find out or we won't. Very often we don't find out until way after the shooting is over that the shooter was on SSRI medications or other medications that may increase the risk of suicide. And that says right on the package, by the way. This is not Alex Jones. This is not my wacky theory. It's on the package that these drugs in certain vulnerable individuals. For some people, they are lifesavers. For other people, they are an addiction that's harder to kick than heroin. and complete with electric shocks in their brain when they try to taper off their doses. And I've watched people go through this. I would, but anyway, we don't know if he was on drugs or not. We don't know much at all, so I'm not going to speculate about it. Ryan, thank you for the call. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Yeah, well, I want to grab these guys before they go too deep into the woods on this. This guy was shooting because he lost his fortune, and that was the end for him. He's 64 years old. He just gambled $30,000 in the last week.
Yeah, I heard. Was it his fortune or was it borrowed money?
Well, either way, he's got to pay it back, and he don't have it.
Right.
So this is his last stand.
Which means that there's this is sort of one of the downsides of being a gambler aspects to this story, if what you're saying is true, Corky, which probably is not going to be covered much out of Vegas anyway.
No, it's not.
That's interesting.
No, it's not. This guy was frustrated. He was, like I said, he was old. The only thing he had was his house. Mm-hmm. And he lost his behind in Vegas, like everybody does. I don't know anybody that comes out of there with bushel baskets full of money.
Yeah, there's
I know a lot of people that go in there.
Right. You get the occasional, real pro at playing poker, but that's pretty much it. Corky, thank you for the call.
They threw him out. They got his picture on the wall.
Yeah.
Card counters and professional gamblers.
Yep.
Their pictures on the wall. They get tossed.
Oh yeah, I know. Corky, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Nancy in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hi, thank you, Tom, and I enjoy your show so much.
Thank you.
And I'm calling about the shooting, and I feel I have a free market solution, which is the canine dogs that can sniff out ammunition and firearms. Mm-hmm. And I think that people can fight back by insisting that these venues provide these dogs in an appropriate number. And I know it's not perfect. Cameras aren't perfect either, but someone who wants to commit a crime prefers not to be on camera, so they go somewhere else. And the artist or the entertainer can demand it, and the people who are buying tickets can simply say, I'm not coming unless you have the...
But Nancy, did you see that there was an attempted terror attack in Europe yesterday? I forget which European country, whether it was Belgium or Sweden or wherever it was. And the guy knifed two people. I think he might have killed one of them.
That.
But
Sure,
the relevant point is that he had to use a knife because he couldn't get a gun.
Right. I know that, but
was in France.
I feel that trying to change the Republicans or trying to change the NRA, good luck. But in the meantime, these dogs are very effective, and if the security guard is shot, the dog can still attack.
Yeah, I got it. Nancy, I got to run, but thank you. It's an interesting suggestion. I mean, but I think that we're looking at dealing with effect rather than cause, and we really need to be looking at cause. And for that, let's hold off for 24 hours before we make any more wild speculations. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll pick up this conversation where we left it off tomorrow. Same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag your age. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.